This is my map that I've built in regards to Ghost Recon. It's called Dock 82 and the mission is a hostage rescue. So before I even started drawing up maps and things, my initial plan was to understand truly and take notes about what the games are involved, how they work. So specifically how all the combat mechanics work, how the stealth intertwines with the combat, and how, more importantly, how the space design and the combat spaces are designed. Specifically in how they cater to different playstyles of, for example, sniper fire, stealth through takedowns, or just enemy evasion, or just the guns blazing approaches. It's all catered to in the same map. So I noted down a few key parameters regarding how the mechanics work for Ghost Recon. So the combat is, as we all know, a third-person cover-based shooter, but specifically this requires smooth movement, for example, transitioning between cover objects to enable push forward or retreating to keep the gameplay smooth. I believe Ghost Recon and The Division both do this really well. What's also an important factor in cover-based shooters is to not make any one position too powerful for player or enemy. For example, like a sniper spot that only the players can reach or only enemies can reach will be too imbalanced. It won't make it as engaging, it won't make it as fun. This can also be done through other ways, for example, by adding combat loops through movement through buildings and the like. And just a quick narrative, just a basic narrative addition into it to provide context for the game. Regarding this area, the intel was gained from an operation prior, which revealed the location of the deeds that have been done throughout this world. So after that was established, my next step was to jot down just location ideas of which I thought would be interesting to work with. So, for example, in the list you see, I understand my handwriting is that of a 5-year-old, but we'll move past that. So my first two ideas were an Arctic outpost and the docks, which was to be my eventual final idea. But I also went with the Houses of Parliament, a gym potentially, a university campus, a cargo ship, a football stadium, a hotel, a subway / train underground train station, a theme park, or a zoo. Most of these I crossed off straight away. I just thought I'll jot them down as an idea, but I didn't really want to further them. The ones that I did, however, were the Arctic outpost, the docks, and the cargo ship. I decided to then further develop these ideas by just doing a quick mind map, detailing the mechanics of the games where I can look at for inspiration, keywords to provide further inspiration of what I can do that, trigger certain emotive elements or just things that are associated with that area, which will then help me build the world and map I've built. So I did two for the Arctic outpost and the docks. I actually went with the docks as the name shows. And this is just a quick level design brief of what I've built. So the mission objectives are to rescue the hostages and to neutralize all hostile forces within the area. Duration between 4 and 5 minutes, as per the brief. Gameplay focus on the stealth, combat and traversal of objects, such as like zip lines and whatnot, which I'll go into further detail later. Camera is third person over the shoulder, which aids with the cover-based mechanics. And combat, of which it can vary depending on player choice and play style. Stealth takedowns for real close range, shotguns for a little bit closer ranges, sidearms, but then rifles and snipers can be then used at further ranges that all provides different sort of firefights. I always wanted to incorporate some environmental usage in this world, just to make it a bit more interesting and to have a bit of like a gimmick of the map, which I'll go into further detail later on. So, quick narrative summary. Hostile insurgents have captured an allied rebel force and are holding them hostage. They are to be taken on board a ship at Private Dock 82 and trafficked across the globe. The ghosts must infiltrate the dock, rescue the hostages, and neutralize any hostile forces within the area. This is just a quick objective example. There are more different methods to completing the objective. This is just the first example that I came up with, and then I've further elaborated. So you arrive at the dock, you infiltrate, for example, you obtain an enemy vehicle, you drive through the front gate as they believe you are part of the organization. This was also used in the Ghost Recon Wildlands mission, where it was trailered in the E3 gameplay trailer, where players would obtain an enemy vehicle at a checkpoint and then drive through the front gates in an attempt to capture the target. I also really was inspired by this idea and I want to incorporate it into the level design as well. So that's one of the methods of infiltration. To rescue the hostages, you need to obtain the manifest from the bridge. This is one of the methods anyway, which will reveal the correct container that they are being housed in. Once the players have reached the container, they can open it and then they extract via a vehicle of their choice, which we'll go into further detail later on. And then to neutralize the hostiles, this can be done in any way that the player chooses. So, for example, so if they want to remain in stealth, they can then team up as two. For example, in a team of 4, 2 players can then stealthily take down enemies, whilst the other 2 provide sniper and covering fire from a further distance. Or they can just engage straight up in combat anyway. So this is an example of like a progressive beat on how the map would go in a typical sort of situation. The players arrive in the area are able to use the overpass bridge as their initial sort of preamble as a vantage point to scout the area before the infiltration. Follow them by exploration, where the players decide as a team which is the best method of moving forward, as for example the truck method or further different methods that I'll go into shortly. Then they operate in a stealthily manner and infiltrate the compound. They're taking down the enemies as they move forward without being detected within the sort of area. Then followed by combat, so the players have been spotted by the enemy. The enemies will call for reinforcements if the communications have not been deactivated, and then they'll engage in a firefight. And then lastly, the hostages have been located and they've been extracted by the ghosts. This is a quick, just sort of basic graph showing the objective pacing through if you were to follow this objective path. So you then got you begin at the beginning your observation, then followed by a little bit of intensity with your exploration, and then through to the stealth, always rising intensity, and then peak intensity is at the combat where action is at its most highest, and then it dies down right back again once the hostages have been rescued. So in my reference gathering, I'll bring this up here. In my reference gathering, I decided to gather references not just for like the game itself. I like to break my references up into different sections of what I feel is important. So, for example, for my first element, I did do the basic. I looked at straight away different types of docks and piers and different cities in the world and how they use their certain piers, specifically New York and London. I looked at mostly. I went with New York because I just felt like it looked a little bit better in terms of how it's designed and laid out. It's quite more geometrically pleasing, I guess. My main inspiration actually came from the Battlefield map, or 2042 map manifest, with these huge cranes. It's as all Battlefield maps are, it's quite big. But these cranes are basically pathed along the entire length of the docks. Players can climb them and on the boats in order to like gain advantages. But what snipers specifically do, they climb onto these cranes to provide covering fire for their teammates, as it can then expose quite a few players running around. However, they also, once been spotted, are also completely exposed from enemy fire. Another element I was looking at was the division as like Pier 93 specifically. My image is a little bit blurry there, but Pier 93 I thought was a really good level in the division. It was quite unique to me with how the pier was labelled and laid out. So that was something I looked at further, as well as just some various concepts, and the 3 Max Payne games all had really good dock levels as well, which I incorporated, as well as Spider-Man and Cyberpunk. I then looked at how the game, specifically the gameplay mechanics themselves. I always feel like it's a good idea to get inspiration and get references of the game you're making for, specifically so you can adhere to the mechanics and how they work. So Ghost Recon, its main, even though it can be played solo, its main sort of attraction is the co-op feature, where it will cater to different playstyles within the same level, as per the brief as mentioned. So I try to incorporate certain elements from this into my design. So, for example, the thermal camera I'll bring up later as well as the truck, and then the sniper and the sort of different ranges of weapons and the stealth elements that were all incorporated into the design as well. And then I felt that like when I was designing the dock area itself, it should have a boat as its main focal point, as what you should be sort of going to as your landmark, I guess. So I looked at different types of ships on what I wanted from this pier. I thought originally I was going to go with a submarine, but it just didn't really fit for me into how the dock was designed. So I went with more of a stereotypical sort of cargo ship. Upon researching this typical cargo ship's dimensions, however, I found out they are massive, and it was just going to make the map too big, and I didn't want that to happen because then I'd be using so much unwanted space, and I wanted to keep it within the gameplay parameters. So what I did was research a bit further into this and found that feeder ships are smaller cargo ships basically designed to lift, basically to transit cargo in the sea, like from one ship to another. And that is the design that I went forward with. I researched a specific ship and looked at the dimensions, and then the dimensions worked well within the level, so I used that. Another huge inspiration for me was Call of Duty Modern Warfare, with the multiplayer map Wetwork or the campaign mission known as Crew Expendable, where the SAS rappel down onto a ship into the middle of the Atlantic Sea and retrieve the nuclear information and whatnot. But I just thought that the mission pacing in this was brilliant, and it made use of the space so well, and it was really authentic in the way that it was designed. Then the focal point for me was I had looked at the bridge, specifically because this is where the players will end up if they follow through a certain path, for example, and wanted to sort of get the design right. And they always have sort of these unique shapes of the bridge, and they're also always high up, as where the captain is, to sort of have a sort of hierarchical structure. Oh, so this is my original paper design. Um, I'm aware I'm not a brilliant artist, but it did the job for me. So I used graph paper to help coordinate the correct measurements, and I also drew myself a little key just to make sure of how I could separate the objects without, they're all essentially squares and circles and triangles, but it also gets the message across for me in my head. But I almost immediately came into a problem with this, and I will go into that now. So also, I couldn't fit the boat on the same page as this design, so I had to then come up with a separate map for this, which was then linked together, which is here. So all the necessary information is on this map. So you have the high cover objects, the low cover objects, the enemies and how they were facing, the lifeboats which are used to extract, and all the different containers of which the hostages can be in, marked by the key and as other objectives. So this is where I was mentioning before. I will go into Maya for a sec. So this is my original sort of plan. Originally, the first drawing was just this element here, and I immediately knew this was too small. And I really needed to expand in terms of how it was laid out, and it just was very, very, very basic. So I then decided to push it forward and then go back to the drawing board with this design here. This expands into the dock, and it makes it a larger space where players can, have different elements, have different play styles. They can sneak through, they can shoot through, and there's just loads of different paths that they can take in order to reach the objective, which is the boat. So the Maya blockout ended up being a bit more advanced than I was expecting. So I tried to add different height elevations for me because having a flat level was rather boring. I also wanted to add extra interactive elements, but I sort of basically use this as my 3D like template, if you will, of how I want to proceed. But even though this is all technically as complete as I felt like I could do a lot more with this. So I then ported this map into Unreal, which is this top-down view here, and I just felt like this is where I could do the best of my work. So I ported the entire Maya map into Unreal. I had to do a lot of tweaks for certain metrics because I didn't have the grid texture as I do in Unreal for like the super grid pack, so I can then correctly gather the metrics of cover buffers and whatnot, and other things that I had to alter for the Unreal version. So this is the initial design from the Maya layout. This is the first part of it. As you can see, I've had a bit of I put more objects in it and whatnot, and provided some sort of context as to how they got here in the first place, rather than just be a dock in the middle of the ocean. So immediately you can see there's multiple paths here. There is the road which leads all the way down to the dock, which you can access by vehicle, or you could even run if you wanted, or if you prefer a more tactical, stealthy approach without using the vehicle method to go through the front gates that are here. You can then rappel down here. You can use rappel and rappel down. So you'd just walk up, you'd hit the button, you'd use the rope, and you slide down to the bottom. You then can then take whichever action that you please on how to infiltrate, which I'll go further into later. This is the next section. So this is the first area of the compound. You have multiple paths that open up to the player, depending on which method that they choose, and how to proceed forward. So you can take this path down here, you can go through the buildings, you can climb on top of the building if you wanted to, or you can go through the warehouse on the left hand side. So I tried to come up with as many opportunities as I could within the constraints of the map at the beginning. So the first was obviously the truck, so you'd have a truck here that would come up to the edge. You'd then it'd be commandeered beforehand. You'd come down the road, you drive around, you come to the gatehouse. The enemy sees that it is an enemy organization truck. The gates open and you're free to drive through. Once here, you can then drive through to the end and then park the truck in sort of this area here. With the truck could be used as a barrier, to prevent enemy vision here, as these guys would move out of the way once the truck is here. You could park the truck here. Instead of getting out straight away and being instantly detected, you could have two snipers, for example, sit up on top of this rooftop and then take them out whilst the truck is barricading their vision so they wouldn't get detected in the first place. So that's one method. The other method was that once you've rappelled down the overpass, you can then sneak through these cover objects, avoiding the guard that's here, and use this hole of the fence here. There's a weapon pickup here, but that's just for the project, really. So then once the player is here, they have two options on where to go. They can go through the left and basically near the gate, and then come up these stairs into these buildings. There are a few enemies in here. They can move through the warehouse. You can climb up onto this container to get a bit of a better vantage point. Or you can, in fact, come up this ladder. You just walk into the ladder and climb it. You walk into the ladder and climb it as well. A sniper could be perched upon here, for example. This is intentionally have little cover, so then it provides a risk for a player instead of just being an invincible area for the players to go to. This zip line can then take the player down to this middle building here, where it also houses the communications box, which is here. I added these cover objects here and to provide the player a little bit of cover for where they are. The main risk of the zipline being that once the player is on the zipline, they really can't get off unless they drop, say here, or even just before it. But it's a severe risk of being detected by the enemy and then losing the sort of stealth early. But the reward is high if you time it right. You can land here, turn off the alarms. You've also then got a building to hide in whilst the patrols walk around and whatnot. Even if the player was in co-op mode, for example, though, whilst one player was sliding down to do this, another player could be on this building again and taking them out and preventing people from actually seeing the player. Another method is to come around this way, and then there's this also watchtower to be mindful of, but there's also ample cover. As long as you time it right, he won't see you. This guy only patrols the docks, so there's not really much chance of him spotting the player from this angle. This is more for a different scenario that I'll go into further. Got these two shacks here with people working on sort of like placeholder vehicles or sort of crates and barrels and things. These areas can again just be pushed upon to gain a different viewpoint. Once you've got to that area, then the player will immediately see that the boat is the objective. It's a massive landmark. It's color coded for my references. And yeah, so these containers house the hostages, which I'll show here, and the player has to rescue them. They have multiple ways of doing this, and I'll come back to the presentation now and show you what I'm talking about. So, for example, for the hostage extraction, there are multiple ways that they can do this. So instead of just obtaining the manifest from the bridge that I showed here, saying I'm coming up to the bridge and killing this guy, this guy, this guy, and then obtaining the manifest from here, The player, for example, like the scout class who uses the drone, if they have the capability of using the thermal camera, they can locate the hostages with that method. This would then this would then quicken the time in terms of how quick the players can actually retrieve the hostages, because they don't have to go through that first bit. So instead of just opening the container and retrieving the hostages via the lifeboat, for example, like I mentioned before, you could climb this crane ladder, enter the crane, kill this enemy here, and take the control of the crane yourself. You can then pick up the container, for example this one, which I've used just as an example here. You can then pick this container up with the hostages still inside it and place it gently onto the dock side. This can then, once you have put the container on the dock side, you can then open the container up from there. This has a risk in of itself, however, as if you move too erratically whilst controlling the rotation or the heightening of the container with the crane, or for example you knock into something, like you hit the side of the boat, for example, then that would damage the hostages, potentially kill them, and you failed your mission. The crane has multiple uses, however. For example, so if you want to pick up the container, you could pick up the container that's not got hostages in it, just this standard one here, and drop it on enemies in some sort of like freak environmental accident. This would only arouse suspicion, wouldn't generally alert enemies because they just feel like it's just been an accident with the crane. You probably have an enemy come and investigate the ladder, which you'd have to take him out. Another method is that, furthering on with the element of using the container as picking up the container itself instead of opening it up, players could, for example, commandeer a cargo helicopter attached with a crane similar and pick them up that way. Again, same risk applies. Too much erratic movement will then kill the hostages. But this also would quicken the gameplay time, and it also risks of the players being shot down by alerting enemies with the helicopter itself. Another method is to open the container on the ship itself, escort the hostages to a lifeboat, which are on the screen now. These golden sort of boats on the side here, they're just, as I said earlier, placeholder. You take them, you open the container up, you extract them to one of the boats on the other side. For example, in this point, you wouldn't use these ones because they're on the dock and they wouldn't really do anything. So you'd bring them over to these ones here. You then drive the boat away, and you've got safety. So in terms of replayability, in terms of the neutralizing hostiles, I wanted the players to be able to be as comfortable with whatever they use, and I tried to provide a map that will cater to that. So, for example, if you're a player who likes to be stealthy and wants to take down enemies through that way, you can. There are plenty of opportunities for you to do so, as long as you time your patrol routes correctly, and you then take down enemies from behind, or you use your sidearm with a suppressor or whatnot. You can also combine with your teammates, for example, as I mentioned earlier, on top of here, with sniper fire, and then taking down enemies at the same time through coordinated tactics. If you're a bit more of an action-centric guy like myself, and you want more of a guns blazing approach, you could, instead of just driving an enemy truck through here, you could drive your own vehicle, like be it a car or whatnot, and just drive straight through the gate and cause as much carnage as you like. This has its own risk. Reinforcements would be immediately called probably from the first guy at the gate here, as well as enemies instantly being on alert, and you probably also have to deal with other enemies, for example, adapting to your playstyle. So if you're in a vehicle with a faster vehicle, they'll probably try and equip rockets instead of just standard firearms to then deal with you quicker. Another method would be to bring up, so you'd use a communications device such as a radio or a phone, and you request help from AI or like rebel forces. They would again come to sort of this location, for example, these marked by these guys here. They would then fight for you. Now you can either take two approaches from this. Sorry, you can even take two approaches from this. You could then either sneak round and then take advantage of all the distractions by then sneaking behind enemies and killing them off whilst they're distracted by your light forces, or just join the front line in the fight and then have the same guns blazing approach as before. This request for radio mechanic could also be used for requesting additional heavy weapons and ordnance, such as heavy machine guns, mortars, big explosive grenade launchers, plastic explosives, all that type of sort of stuff. You could then request this from them, and you could fire mortars into the base. Again, instant alert is your risk, but you'd also deal with a large amount of enemies as well early on. Only the risk is if the player fires too far, they could risk damaging the hostages on the boat. And if you wanted to go really heavy, you could commandeer an enemy gunship or something and fly in and use the heavy weaponry on the helicopter itself and just shoot everybody. Again, the risk is very similar to sort of how you drive through the front doors. The immediate risk of being shot down, immediate risk of also alerting the enemy, immediate risk of always having reinforcements come and try and shoot you up. So, mission completion reward. So, for the hostages that are rescued, XP is given to the player for their level up skill trees and whatnot. The ally rebel ranks were bolstered with further members. This means you can possibly have more allies come to your aid at once, or they'd be stronger, for example. And then for the second primary objective of the hostiles being neutralized, XP is also granted to the player. The rebel allies would have upgraded munitions, possibly for a temporary time, whilst you have the base under control, as well as a player or an extra weapon, would be available through unlock through the players, for example, by a container being opened and you'd find a gun in it or something like that. So this is where I wanted to focus on how to sort of have this unique idea of a day and night cycle, similar to how the Ghost Recon Wildlands mission I mentioned before, where they use the cover, where they infiltrate using the truck at night. I wanted to do something kind of similar, but with a different sort of take on it and using my gimmick of the cranes. During the day, the big cargo ship is docked at the pier. There's extra security, and you're able to rescue civilians using the crane if you wanted to. At night, however, the boat is at sea, as in it's going to its destination to traffic people across the globe. This would be at an extremely slow pace, for example, just so it gives the illusion of the boat's moving, you have to catch it, but it wouldn't really go too far. And then, however, also the security is more lax, so there's not as many people patrolling. Some people be in their beds and cots and whatnot, as well as there's also your rescue options aren't as what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, as expansive as when the ship is docked. So you'd only really have sort of maybe 2 or 3 options if it's at night, which I'll go into now. So the I hit the wrong button. So for example here, these 2 images side by side will show once it loads. There we go. So during the day, the boat is at the dock. You can still use the cranes and you can infiltrate the boat through the stairs in the middle. At night, however, the boat is at sea, so the cranes aren't usable for extraction. They still be able to use for combat and whatnot, but they can't be used for that. However, the main way to get onto the boat now is to use these boats here along the right hand side. These craft will be just a standard enemy small craft, like a jet ski or something. You can then drive around to the back of the boat and there'll be a ladder. You can then climb the ladder and you'll be able to infiltrate the ship through that way. I just thought this would be an interesting mechanic of how it could change. It just makes the level feel a bit more dynamic, and then it would also feel a bit more responsive and immersive regarding the weather and time of day. So, interactivity. The, I tried to add as many different interactive elements as I could within the time constraints that I had. The first is the zipline, how I mentioned before. I'll discuss the zipline and ladders at the same time. So simply, the ladder player goes into this volume. This is just a placeholder teleport thing. Come up this ladder, come up this ladder. You then got this like pole antenna thing, and you can use the zipline to get down to here. As I mentioned previous, the player is in the risk of being spotted early, rather than just taking the longer sneaky route. But the reward is that they get to then deactivate the alarms without attracting too much attention. If they do actually if they manage to get down without being detected. And as I mentioned with the cranes, These can be used in different ways, so you can use to extract or to then deal harm to enemies. What I also thought would be a cool idea was to use the crane not only to like drop stuff onto enemies themselves, but then you could possibly pick enemies up and then just drop them from heights, similar to how, like, comedic things happen in, like, for example, like Just Cause. They, when you stick the little jet powered boosters on cows and stuff, and it's just a bit of a laugh, you could possibly do, I don't know, like a trophy for that or something. And then there is, as I mentioned just now, the Allied Assistance Request, which is using a communications device for them to help in a different type of way. So now I'm going to just do a quick sort of playthrough of it, just to show the different, well, a path that, for example, a player could take. And I'm going to just, play through it from start to finish. There's obviously a lot of placeholder content here, but it's just that's what I had to work with. I'm just going to take cover behind this guy so I don't get shot. The camera's broken again. Okay, pop out. I'm just going to shoot him. These are just placeholder guys to sort of just showcase of the allied help or player help, for example. I'm going to go through the door, well, the hole in the fence, and then I'm going to go to the right. I'm going to climb the ladder here, and then I'm going to climb this ladder in the hopes that I can get to the if I can get to the zipline end without being detected, which I have. I'm going to take cover. This guy, I'm going to take him out. And then I'm going to drop down. And the alarms have been disabled. Got some extra ammo for my trouble as well, just a sort of a small reward. And then I'm going to use the shotgun to deal with this guy. And then I'm going to enter this building here that's full with enemies. And this guy's tried to flank me. And I'm going to push in. Wish the enemies would work with the cover a little bit better, unfortunately, but that's just the sort of content that I've got. I'm going to get the rifle back out. I'm going to deal with the guy at the top of the stairs. I'm going to try and move past these guys that are detecting me. And I'm going to go obtain the manifest. So I'm going to kill this guy. I'm going to take cover here. I'm going to move on. Oh, I'm being shot from the back again. Reload. Apparently these guys just don't want to have anything to do with me. I'm just going to continue running to the back of the boat. Come up these ramps here. Well, stairs, but I made them to ramps because it was easier. Whoa. And kill these three guys here. I've obtained the manifest. And now I'm coming back down. And I'm going to go and rescue the hostages. So they're in this container here. I've rescued the hostages. And then for me to complete the mission, I would then kill the rest of the enemies. Hopefully these enemies aren't too smart. And I fall back into this cover. Just didn't want to do that apparently. We'll just kill these guys anyway then. I think that's all of them. Oh, no, we've got one here. That should. Now, when I did this, it was for me like I was happy with this, but I felt like I needed to really make a few changes after I'd finished it. So I iterated it and I made some changes by. I'll show you. So the changes I made were initially I changed the side the style of the hanger because I wasn't very happy with it. It didn't really do much for me. I didn't like the design and it was just a bit too basic, and it also just blocked its position, blocked too much space for what I wanted to do. It took up too much space rather than me allowing it to use it in a more effective manner. So I decided to change the hanger. I added this little area here. So instead of this being like a separate building on its own, I decided to change that by adding this staircase and having like a catwalk. So then the player can then access this rooftop here as well. Also access it from this side as well by jumping on this container. I've also opened this section up to allow more of a chance for the players to use the truck example, so that instead of just because when I noticed when I built it the first time, players would struggle with the size of a truck, for example here. Whoa, 1 second. So yeah, I found that it was a bit of a struggle to get a truck in at any old point, so I decided to instead that use the hangar instead. So instead of going through the route here, you then drive through the hangar itself, which will then open a clearer path for you. I found that there were too many obstacles just to warrant the original design, so I decided to change that. And the most notable change I did was that I changed the boat in terms of its height and its width. I decided to do this because I felt like in the original design plan it was a bit too small and it didn't really stand out as a landmark and as like a sort of a focal point for an objective for players to use. So I decided to then up its height and up its width to make it more of a dominant across the scene. And I also added a downstairs point, so then you can add extra. It also adds an extra level of interactivity and an extra player for extra zone for combat. So instead of, for example, the enemies being in the container or the hostages being in a container, for example, in the night cycle, it could instead have to rescue them from the brig in here, which would then add an extra level of combat. You have to explore you just got a whole level different level to explore. So you've got like a mess hall type area, crew quarters, the engine room, which is down here, and then you've got the jail cells. Just to add to an extra level of depth to the boat, because when I originally did the boat, I felt like it was a bit too flat and I wanted to add some extra height variation. Another change I made to the boat was I changed the bridge. I changed the bridge because I didn't like it when I first did it in the Maya scene. It felt like it was a bit too. It didn't look good enough. So in the original design, it was obviously quite small. I kept the sort of style like this because I liked the way I did this area. I just wanted to improve on it. It was also a bit too small on the inside and the outside, as it was very basic, as you can see here. I didn't really put as much as I wanted to into it. Put more of a focus into this area just to sort of refine it and make it as a as a better overall section of the for trying to improve on where I felt the weakest sections were. So I made it bigger on the inside, give it a bit more of a context of an actual bridge. I did this sort of catwalk on the outside so then I can add more patrol routes, and then I added a bit more detail into this area as well. So yeah, I changed. I also had to then change the width and the length and the height of the boat, I also had to then adjust the cover positions just so I could then, because the original design would not cater to this extra size. So then I had to rejig a few things. I did some extra cover spots, some height variations, and just overall, I felt like I've improved the product really. Overall, I'm quite happy with it. I probably will make some more changes to it in the future, specifically around this area where the sort of docked boats are for the night cycle. I feel like I should do more with this as a being as it is sort of like a main objective path if it's at night. And as well as like these brushes here, if it's a bit of a sort of a personal little complaint, but if like Unreal could do these stairs where they don't have this block brush at the back, so you could just sort of like do like a catwalk step, sort of like almost like self-supporting ones without the big block at the back. I prefer that, but I didn't. I could have just done the ramps like I did similar to the bridge over here. So I guess that's an alternative. And I'll probably change the buildings here in the middle as well a little bit because I just feel like they're lacking in sort of spatial design. I guess I could probably open them up a little bit, use more of the space, and just to sort of get a better idea of what I could do with certain buildings. But yeah, overall I'm quite happy with it. As I said, I'll probably make some changes. But yeah, I'll leave a link to the if you wanted to play this, for example, because it is fully playable to a certain extent. The playable pack is a bit clunky in certain aspects, like the AI don't take cover very well, etc. But in terms of design intentions, I feel like it works quite well because you can see certain elements. Well, I've tried to incorporate all the elements from the game into this own little project here, but obviously with a reduced sort of level of polish, as I guess you would say. It's sort of in its very early phases, but I like to keep it this way because there's something quite nice about the blockouts, I guess. But yeah, there's a link to it in my website just below where the video will be pushed if you want to download and play it. And yeah, feel free to drop me an email or whatever with some feedback regarding it. I'd be much appreciated.